Get that going. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Don Saucier. I'm the Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center here at K-State. I'm very excited to see all of you. Since our meeting last week, we had a wonderful event last week, and then I tested positive for COVID that night. So it's been a little bit of a yucky week for me, and I'm still on the mend. I've been wearing this Sherpa sweatshirt pretty much continuously. It's the only thing that makes me feel cozy right now. But I'm really excited to be here for today's event. Today's event is going to be awesome. Hopefully you've checked out the promotional video. If you haven't, still check it out, because it's best promotional videos we've ever seen. I would like to say that was something of the TLC's engineering. It wasn't. That was Dr. Porath, and it was awesome. This series meets every Wednesday at noon. We'll have another event for you next Wednesday. We're still finalizing that event, so details will be put out over social media about what that event is. We think we know what that event is, but we need some confirmation. So we'll let you know what's going to happen next week as we get closer. Noon to 1 every week over Zoom. We have a professional development certificate that you can earn as either a GTA or a staff or a faculty member. No, as always, I'm going to drop wonderful links in the chat. If you're a faculty member and you do great teaching and you help other people do great teaching, you can apply to be a TLC fellow. We're really excited when people take that opportunity. Spoiler alert, you'll again get to be in our PD series next year if you're selected as a fellow, and that's a pretty awesome thing. And I know a number of people in this Zoom call right now that would be awesome fellows for the TLC. So that is our lead up. And without further ado, I am very excited to hear some amazing strategies to make our teaching better from Dr. Porath. Dr. Porath, the floor is yours. And thank you so much for being here today.
Okie doke. To get us started, I'm going to put in the chat the slides. If you want to follow along, you are welcome to do that. And if you want to make a copy for yourself, so you have it, and if you want to, play around with it and change it and make it yours, you are welcome to do that. I'm very much open access, open source. So what's mine is yours. I should be able to share screen. There we go. Okay, if you did not see the promotional video, we're going to be talking about tools, and it's going to be like way over the top about tools. So I'm Suzanne Porath, assistant professor in the College of Education, and my background is K-12 education, and I've brought a lot of that into my teaching. Although I have taught in the College of Education, I've also taught in non-education courses for people coming back to get their bachelor's degrees. And I've pulled a lot of that into it to help my students make meaning of content. So we're going to talk about 4 tools. And again, some of them you have probably heard of already. You might have played around with them, and you might have just forgotten a little bit that they are a thing. We all have our tried and true tools, and they work. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with things like discussion boards or reflection papers, essays, oral presentations, all of those types of things. But I would like to remind you of some of the other tools that you do actually have in your toolbox. So if any of you know me, you've probably heard me talk about Flipgrid. I have talked about it for Global Campus. I did have a bite. I think Flipgrid is an absolutely amazing tool that that people may not know an awful lot about. And I see I did not put that in the chat. There we go. The chat is now, or in the chat, I put the slides for this. So give me a reaction. How many of you have, first of all, heard of Flipgrid? Give me a thumbs up or a yes or something. Okay, now the next one, how many have used Flipgrid either as a student or as an instructor? Couple of thumbs up yet? So I have a much more thorough explanation of Flipgrid, and if you want to have a conversation with me about it, but I'm going to go over it very, very briefly here. Flipgrid is a video-based response platform. It is free for educators, and one of the coolest things is it integrates into Canvas. And so you can use Speedgrader to grade. I'm not going to show you how to do that right now. That's very technical. I'm happy to work with any of you, but it is absolutely awesome because you can then go right to Speedgrader and do that grading. It is generally organized like a discussion board, except your students would then video record their initial responses and connect a replies so they can respond to each other. You set up a question or a prompt, and within that you can include media. So a YouTube video, you want them to watch something, you can record something and put it into YouTube and put the link in. You can use like Animoto or something. You can put links in, you can attach files. And then you can also set the time limit from 15 seconds to 10 minutes, and that is the cap for it. The nice thing is the embedded camera provides filters and stickers, and it can be really fun to play with. And it automatically transcribe everything. And that's good for two reasons. First of all, students can then put the closed captions on and they can read the transcriptions, which makes it great for universal design. But you can also download the transcriptions so you can read what students said to each other and not just listen to them. So I'm going to give you a really quick tour of what this actually looks like. And I'm going to start from high level to low level. So you can integrate it with Canvas if you want. You can also keep it standalone and just do it through Flipgrid, and then you provide the link for students. But and then you have groups. And so your group would be a course. And if you look at this screen, this is my dashboard. And on my dashboard, you can see the courses I have, and it's got that class number there. That means it's integrated with Canvas. So this is my dashboard. I can go into my Flipgrid dashboard and look at these individually, or like I said, I can go through Speedgrader and look at each of those. You can see how many responses, and starting out the year, you can see if they're active or not active. So once you click on a group, or in this case, my course of literacy assessment, and this one's from fall, you can see all the various topics. So over the course of this semester, I had 7 topics, and you can look at what some of them were. So we had some introductions. We talked about an article. I'm going to show you that in a little bit, the feed up, feedback, and feed forward. I had them show processes, look at some data, and then talk about it. And then also show things in their classrooms, which is one of the greatest things about Flipgrid, because you can show processes and give tours. So up on the top, you will notice that there's some things you can do. You can edit this, you can add co-leads. So if you're co-teaching with somebody, you can put them in as an instructor on your Flipgrid too. You can also disconnect it from Canvas if you want to. I don't know why you would. You can also export all of this data. So also a really great thing for research. So this is then when you go into the specific topic. So this is my instructor page. This is what it looks like for me. And you can see where it says feedback in that image. You can put GIFs there, or you can embed a video right there. You can put attachments in. And the really cool thing, if you look down, there are QR codes for each initial response. So it's also great if you want to pull out a particular one and have other students look at it. Maybe in your class, you can provide them the QR code and immediately go and look at it. Like I said, you can also do that spreadsheet of responses. And so it exports into a CVS Excel sheet, and you can look at, how long it is, and then it also has the transcripts in there. You can also see on these responses how many people have viewed them. So usually whoever's the last doesn't get a whole lot of views. And you can download individual transcripts. You can see here I have my instructions. There's a limit to how many characters. I think it's about 1,000 characters for the instructions there. So I have full instructions on the Canvas page, and then I summarize it here on the Flipgrid page. Whoops, all my things are going very fast. So this is what the students see. And what I'm showing you here is an actual public page, because then I didn't have to block out all the faces. This is a public page for 1,000 Women in STEM, but this is what students would see when they go into the Flipgrid. So if they go from Canvas, it clicks on it and it opens up the Flipgrid page, or you can just go to Flipgrid. And when they get here, they see the thumbnails of everybody's faces. You do a selfie at the end of recording your video. To record a response, you just click on that little video button where it's red. This project specifically, there is an instructor in Nebraska who is a biology teacher who is collecting testimonies from women who are in various STEM fields and asking them to talk about what type of scientists they are and what they study. And as you can see with the student view, they can look over, they can add their names, they can add underneath a title to it. And then where the hearts are, you can see if it's been liked or if there's other comments. This one has been shut off for comments, but if you were doing it in your course where that heart is, you would see how many comments were there. And like I said, for the students, you can insert those media where that 1000 STEM Women Project, the blue is. You can embed that video in there, or you can attach the files. So this is what it looks like in Speedgrader. When you go into Speedgrader, the video will be right there. If you look up to the top for the submissions, just like any other file, you can see every submission. So if, say, for example, like I have, you need to have an initial response by Wednesday and then multiple responses following it up, it will all be right in here. When you integrate Flipgrid into Canvas, you have to add your rubrics first before you connect it. But it just makes it really easy to grade then, because you click on the rubric and you can put your comments down below. So that's a really fast overview. And if you want more information, again, I'm happy to talk with you. You can also Google Flipgrid. There's tons of stuff out there that shows you how to use it. But how do I use it? So I use it a lot for getting to know students, and I have different assignments depending on what course it is, just basic introductions. Sometimes I have them show 8 nouns about themselves. What would your personal mascot be? What goals do you have for the course? Or sometimes I have them write an acrostic and show us their acrostic. Because within that video or within the camera, again, they can attach pictures and they can do text and split screen and all that. So they can play around with it, put filters in, so it makes it really personal. At times I have it in place of a traditional discussion board, so I might trade off. I've done a lot of work in Flipgrid and discussion boards, and I've done some formal research on it to see what the differences are between. And quite often, if the topic is a little bit more controversial and you want them to provide a lot of evidence, the discussion board is the way to go, because they're writing and they're doing it more formally. In the Flipgrid, what I found is this is a little bit more less controversial and a lot times more, well, I think this, you might provide some evidence, but because they're not citing it, it feels a lot more conversational. I used it for exit slips. So I took my students on a field trip, and rather than having them type something up while we were there, I had them spread out and say, tell me what you learned from this. What is one thing you learned? What's another question you have? And how might you use this in your teaching? What it's nice about that is it's really quick. They don't have to sit down and type things up. Clearly, reflections on reading and media viewings. I use it a lot for touring spaces. So because I'm in teacher ed, my students go out to classrooms, and so they can tour around or they can show us materials within their classroom. You can also use it on field trips, and they can show what's going on the field trip. You can also show a process. And so I had one that was, what is your reading process? And they talk through how they did, and they could actually show how they actually did something or demonstrate something. I have my students do mini lessons, and they do it through Flipgrid. Clearly, you can do performances up to 10 minutes. And then, of course, any type of presentation with replies, so they can be viewing each other. So if you want some more resources, I have a couple of things here. Teaching in Higher Ed has a really good podcast, and Ramesh is that instructor that did the 1000 Women in STEM project. Then how you can humanize your courses. Now, I do use this for both my face-to-face courses and my online courses. I do use it differently between them. For my online courses, it's very much about humanizing, getting them to connect with each other, figuring out that social presence with each other. With my face-to-face classes, I have them quite often do their performances, so I don't have an entire hour of one student after another doing a performance. They can do it on their own time in their own space, and then we can go in and view them on our own time in our own space. So that's my first tool. As you can tell, I'm really excited about it. Are there any questions right now about Flipgrid? Go ahead and unmute or type in the chat. And I'll put in the chat again if you didn't get it. Those are the slides. You're welcome to them. Okay, hearing none, we're going to move on to the next tool. One-pagers. Give me a thumbs up or a hand up or something. Have you heard of a one-pager? Ooh, my mouse is going crazy. Okay, you previewed what they are now. So a one-pager is a single-page response that shows students' understanding of a piece of text. And we're going to talk about text being very broad. So it could be a poem, a novel, chapter, a book, other literature, but it can also be things like a podcast or a film or a documentary. And within this, the whole idea is to meld the verbal and the visual and making sure that students are using the visual. So here are some examples. And again, these are from my K-12 background, but you can imagine how this would look in pretty much any place else. So on one side, you have where students read a nonfiction article and then responded it in using a one-pager. Now, if you notice, this is hands-on drawing. You can do it digitally too. And I've had students do that when we were fully on Zoom. But you're looking for the main ideas. And typically you want to have more image, or you want to make sure that they're having images in there so that they're connecting the text and representing it in different ways. So these are from particular books, and you can see how some of the imagery goes through, and I have a couple of resources in there for you. But you can do it for a lot of other things. Here's a couple more novels that they're shown. And again, you can hang them up and they look very lovely, or you can do them in Google Slides and you can have people view between the students. But you can do them in other places. So here are two really great examples of using them in science with some resources. And so that they're using those imageries to really tell whatever the story is of what they're reading is. So nonfiction or fiction, like I said, podcasts or movies or documentaries are really easy to use. So if you're just getting started in something like this, the Pedagogy in a couple other places has some templates, and so you can see over on that one side some of the templates that already kind of split things up on the page, because for some students it can be really scary to just enter an empty page and not know what to do with it. So you can download those templates or have them choose one that they wanted to do. And again, these are all like physical drawings where you can certainly do them online. But this is one of the ones that I do enjoy having within class, because they're showing as they're drawing what their understanding is. And it's really easy to glance over things, but it also generates a lot of conversations as they're choosing whatever their images are going to be. So you can move from a one pager, which is an individual on one page, to make it much bigger in the same vein. And sometimes they're called graffiti walls or gallery walks. And so here's a couple of examples of how you can make it a bigger, more collaborative way of working. So many of you have probably heard of gallery walks, and that's the one up right underneath where it says graffiti walls, where the instructor posts something in the middle of it and everybody collaborates to post things, whether it's with sticky notes or writing right on it, what they think about it. And if you notice in that page, we've got some responses with arrows as they are connecting their ideas with other people's ideas. The other one, we have the states and the things that are going on in the states. That was a very large collaborative mural. And again, this one was probably in a middle or high school, but you can get the idea of how you might be able to use it in your own classes. Now, the one on the bottom, the reading graffiti wall, this one is very text heavy, but students were talking about major quotes that they found, and you can see the quotation marks around them, or they would summarize parts of the story. So here's just a couple ways I've used them. You can see a gallery walk that I used with my students out in the hallway, where they were writing notes and putting them on there and then adding to that. And then on the bottom, this past semester, my students did a practicum where they were in a rural classroom, and I asked them to create a one page that kind of summarized what their experience was all about. And you can see that one in the bottom. So here's a whole bunch of resources on one pagers and graffiti walls and how you can use them. And again, because I'm a teacher educator, a lot of these resources come out of K-12, but they're highly adaptable. I had my students do a graffiti wall at the end of the semester where they were summarizing all of the stuff we did in our 16 weeks together, using mostly images with a couple of labels. I also just did that one this morning where we were entering a new chapter. I split it up into sections, and each group took a section, and they're going to teach on Monday using their big graffiti poster. The rest of the class, what their section was. So that is tool number 2. We're doing pretty good on time, which is good. Any questions on tool number 2? And I'm looking at the chat now. A couple of questions on Flipgrid. No, there is not a maximum number of topics. I think I'm up to 93 topics. No. Oh, for any one class. I haven't hit that yet. I have like 93 groups at this point because I've used it for several years. And I think any one group, I've had like 15 different topics. So I don't think there's many limits on that. I think I'm up to, what was it? I think I have 120 days of content that students have responded. Oh, great question. How long does it take students to do one pager? It depends on how detailed you want it to be. So like today, I had big chart paper, and each group had just one section that was about 4 pages ish, and it took them about 15-20 minutes. It really depends on how long the content is, if they're reading the content within the course, or if they're coming in with it and you're helping them do that part of it. That makes a difference. And it also depends on how much text you want them to have. Because you saw some of them that, like, where a summary of an entire novel, there was a lot more text in there versus the images. So what I would suggest is, like we usually do, try out the assignment for yourself and see how long it takes you, and then add a little bit more time for your students because it will be new for them. Yeah, gallery walks are really awesome. Capturing audience participation. Yeah, that's super good. Synthesis versus meta reflections. That's a really good one. So again, it depends on what your instructions are for students, what you want them to do. If you've got multiple sources and you want to bring it together, that is a really great way to do it, is through one pager. What I would suggest students do is that they use a different color for each of the sources so they can see where it comes from, so they don't have to worry about citing it, but they can immediately see where the information was coming from. Or if it's something that all 3 of them mentioned, or 4 of them, or whatever it is, use one color for that. There's a lot of ways you can play around with this, but the major power of this is that they have to represent text in different ways. So it's a lot harder to plagiarize. And then of course, if they're going to use quotes, they actually use quotes within that. So keep the suggestions coming. I'm seeing lots of people talking in the chat about the different ways that they have used these things. Keep those conversations going as we're moving along. I've put in the chat a couple of times, but I'll put it one more time in case somebody joined us late. Here are the slides for this presentation, and all of these resources are in there. So browse through, and something is going to probably jog your thoughts or your memories of how you can use these. Any other questions on one pagers, gallery walks, or graffiti walls? Okay. Give me a hands up or a reaction. How many of you have used Jamboards of some sort, or heard of them even? I see a whole lot of no's. Okay, so we're going to slow down a little bit with this one because I want to show you how these actually work. This is a Google product, so if you have a Google account, you have access to a Jamboard. Basically, it is a digital whiteboard for collaborative writing and thinking. I first started using these in Zoom conferences and, of course, Zoom teaching. You know how when students are in Zoom and you want to hear or see what's going on, but you keep moving from room to room, and as soon as you pop into the room, they stop talking, or they suddenly start working when they weren't before. A Jamboard is a really great way to see what students are doing in real time because they're typing it on the collaborative whiteboard. So basically, and I'm going to show you some examples so you see how they actually work. But the instructor creates as many boards as needed for each group. If you're going to do partners or triads or whatever, you count how many you have. And so the Jamboard itself is the whole thing. And then there's individual boards for each of the groups. So once the students go there, all students in one group go to one board and they can collaboratively write and think, which includes things like drawing and typing and putting up images, using sticky notes. And as an instructor, you can browse through all the boards in real time to see what they're doing. So I'm going to show you some examples so you can actually recognize what this looks like. So give me a thumbs up. Are you seeing copy of Icebreaker? And it's coming up very slowly. Yeah, okay. So this is an activity, and I took the students' names out of it, but this is an activity I had them do. In this case, this was on Zoom. So when we went to fully remote year and a half ago, 2 years ago, whatever it was. This is an activity I usually have them do in person that looks like this on paper. And basically what I ask them to do is on the corners, they write their name and they write something that is unique about them. And then in the middle, they have to come up with things that they have in common. And I try to get them to go past, I'm at K-State, I'm in education, because we know that. And so they would go into their breakout rooms, and breakout room 1 would have access to this one. Now, if you look up at the top, you can scroll through each of the boards, and I put the numbers on so they would know what they were. And there's sticky notes. So these are sticky notes that you can move around and you can change the colors. You can also write over here, you can add the pictures, add a text box, things like that. And I'm going to show you a couple more examples so you see what these all look like. So this particular group didn't use any of the sticky notes. They just used the text box. And this group enjoyed the sticky notes. And there's some text boxes. You can see a little bit of drawing there. And they came up with a lot of things that they had in common, which was good. So let me show you another one. So this is one that my students created to use while they were teaching. And they had a small group of students. And so they started out with a bell ringer. And so each student would go to their one board. So student 4 knew who they were, and they would have to fix this sentence. So this was a bell ringer for the beginning of their lesson. And then student 5, etc. And then they moved on. What would you, so they were reading a book called If I Build a House, and what would your room look like before we do it on paper? So each student had their own page that they could start writing and thinking. And again, this was one, they were fully on Zoom. So each of their students were on Zoom. And rather than having the students draw it on paper and try to show it, they would do it on the whiteboard so the teachers could go through and see what was going on. Ooh, good question. I actually don't know Miro, so I can't answer that. I'll have to look at that one. That's kind of exciting. I love learning new tools. So this one is just a blank one, and you can get a sense of what it is. So you can use it for groups or you can use it for individuals. This is one that I encountered in a conference I went to. Oh wait, no, this is one word. So some of you probably know about like one little word or one word for the year. And this is a collaborative whiteboard where people are posting what their one word for the year is, and everybody's designing them slightly different. So this one is a public board. So the person who created this actually posted it on Twitter, and you are welcome to come see it. And so all of these people posted what their one word is for the year. So to go through, you click up here. And that's one person's. And again, this one's public. People are putting their names, but they know that it is public. But it's a way that you can have people collaborate that are not even in the room or close to each other. You can send them this link and ask them to claim a slide and put their ideas together. You can see everybody has a slightly different idea of how they wanted to represent their word of the year. So a couple of other resources or ways you can use this. So like I showed you an icebreaker. You can also use it as a student check-in. So in education, we're talking a lot about social emotional learning and checking in with students, how they're doing, and also helping them identify their own emotions. So there's a lot of templates out there because instructors in a lot of spaces, including higher education, are using Jamboards. So if you Google Jamboard template and then whatever your topic is, there probably is something out there. Ooh, my mouse again went crazy. Stop. So this is one that is a template that I snagged, where when you students come in, whether it's a Zoom or in face-to-face, they can grab a sticky note and then they can put their name wherever they are, or they can have a pseudonym if you don't actually want them to have names. A mood meter is a way to help students think about where they are right now. And you can see you've got the different quadrants that have emotions that are related, and they go from more of a low level of the emotion to a high level of the emotion. So pleasant to ecstatic, or peeved to enraged, ashamed to alone, blessed to serene. And so you can have them put their name on, or just grab their sticky notes and put them where they are. So you kind of know where students are as you start your class. And if you have a whole bunch up here, you might want to do something different to get them regulated before you start learning, or down here, you might need to have some conversations. So it's a nice way to do just a really quick check-in with students. There's another version of this called a roller coaster, which would work the same way. That you could just have them grab a sticky note and place themselves on the roller coaster as it loads very slowly. Where do they feel they are right now? And again, it could be really different. My husband, this would be a really good place where the loop-de-loop is upside down. That would be really exciting, great for him. That would make me ill. So even if our sticky notes are in the same place, it might mean something different. So with the Jamboards, you can put an image behind it and have students work with those images. You can also do some of our very traditional things that we do in place. And now with COVID, we might not want students moving around as much, or there's no room in the room because we weren't trying to distance each other. So you could put something up there and say, pick one and vote. And so you might have 4 or 5 things, and then they just grab their sticky notes and put their sticky notes on it. And it's a quick way for you to understand, or you can understand where the students are. Clearly you can have a pro-con collaborative discussion, just have the T-chart and have them put their ideas in there. Sticky note brain dump is really fun. A lot of times I would have students do that with actual sticky notes and go up to the whiteboard. But again, when we're on Zoom or we don't want to do a lot of movement, we can do it through a Jamboard like this. You can have students do group note taking together. This is also a really great way to do a gallery walk when you don't have the room to actually take them out someplace. And so you can have something different on each of the boards. And rather than assigning a group to a board, you would tell students, go to whatever board you want and just move through them. And post your comments or connections, texts, links, all that kind of stuff. A lot of us no four corners. And so you might have a topic that might have four possible solutions. And so you have students go to the four corners of the rooms, literally. But you could do this also then on the Jamboard. And so they could go to the corner that they choose and use your sticky notes to talk about their reasoning. And then, of course, you can also put graphic organizers into the Jamboards, and they can use those graphic organizers. So if you're doing something like, well, in some cases, you might do a collaborative story. So you might post a plot graph, and people could collaborate together about how they're going to have the events moving up to the climax. You could put in a KWL chart and have them all add, and I think that's the one I have in here is the KWL chart. Yeah, so you could have a KWL chart.
So I'm hoping Dr. Porath is just having a very short-term Zoom issue, and we'll be back here in just a second. So far, one of the things that I'm really appreciating is there are a lot of really cool technological things that don't look all that hard to do, and then some lower tech things as well. One of the things that I do in my teaching, I'm not an early adopter of anything, so I really appreciate when these things scale down to something of my technical ability. And Dr. Porath, I was just facilitating, and you get back. I'm so happy to see you. And you're muted. Zoom is fun. Okay, well, yay, the mute works. Okay, so it finally came up because it booted me out. So there we go, KWL chart. What did you last hear from me? Like, how long was I talking to myself? Maybe 30 seconds. Okay. So you would have students grab their sticky notes. What do I know? Activating prior knowledge. What do I want to know are the questions. And then at the end of whatever your study is, oh man, and it's not sharing screen. Thank you. There we go, share screen. Thanks for that. Okay, and then at the end of the unit, what they learned. So this is a template. You could do this again in small groups. If you had like a really large class and you didn't want all of them put their sticky notes on one, you could have multiple Jamboards, and they would just join one of the Jamboards. And yeah, I got to get everything reset again because it all messed up. Okay. So those are some of the graphic organizers, and here are a whole bunch of templates. There's a YouTube video that gives you a really quick overview of how to use Jamboards and how to set them up. Ditch that textbook. If you don't know this site, this is an absolutely amazing site. It is, again, geared for K-12 education, but there's a lot of things that are highly adaptable for higher education. And there's lots of ideas with most of the things I've talked about. They've talked about Flipgrid and graffiti walls and that type of thing too. So there's 20 tips, and you've seen some of the tips in there. And then Google itself has a short tutorial of how to use the Google Jamboard. And not that I'm promoting, you know, Google for the world, but Jamboards are really super useful. So I've seen a couple of things in the chat. Beth is using them for exit tickets, quick, simple, and anonymous. That is a nice thing too. You can make them anonymous, which is very handy. And you can make your own graphic with a JPEG and just set it as the background. Absolutely. And Leslie used it to do a short lecture, and then they could have those hand-drawn graphics in there. Absolutely. Thoughts or other questions about Jamboards and how you might use them or how you have used them?
Suzanne, if I have in Canvas groups already set up, can I put the Jamboard in each group, or do I have to do an overall one for the entire class?
For your sanity, I would do one Jamboard for the class with as many boards as you have groups.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Because then you can just move through them and you can see exactly what they're doing in real time.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Thank you, Della. You can download it afterwards, so you have a copy of everything. I mean, you can always go back in there, but because it's editable, things might disappear eventually. So yeah, you can download it and then use it in other ways, which is awesome. And though these didn't completely show it, you can put graphics in there, you can put images in there, you can do drawing. There's lots of great examples. How are we doing? Okay. Any other thoughts on Jamboards? Categorization. Oh, absolutely. You can put a whole bunch of stuff on a Jamboard and ask them to categorize it and see what they know about that. That's a great one.
I apologize if you said this and I missed it. Is Jamboard a free account?
Yes. Yep. If you have a Google account, you've got access to Jamboard.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, last tool. And this is something we probably have all experienced. And again, you probably have all these tools in your toolbox already. One of my very favorite authors, Jim Burke, he wrote 2 books, Reading Reminders and Writing Reminders. And sometimes we just need to have reminders of things that we saw at one point, forgot. So Jigsaw Technique is one you've probably all experienced at one point, where the instructor chunks some content into manageable pieces that can mostly stand alone. But when learned together provides a much fuller picture of whatever the topic is. So you have expert groups that research or read or view content, and they develop teaching presentations and activities together. They're the experts in whatever that one part is. And then they go into their home group, or I'll call them jigsaw groups, one person from each of the expert groups, and the expert teaches their content to the new group. So the graphic on the bottom, you can see all the blue, the one blue content, they're learning together whatever the content is. And then in the second graphic, all the ones come together and the blue one is going to teach their content to the red, green, and purple group members. So this is a picture from just this morning because I use this technique today. We read, this is a report. There are 5 parts to it. And so each expert group had one of the 5 parts. And then today they went into their jigsaw group to teach theirs to the rest of the group members. And so what I had them do is the expert groups posted their presentation. They did one presentation amongst the 5 of them, and they posted it in a discussion board so everybody had access to it. And then when they went into their jigsaw group, I gave them a graphic organizer to help them take notes on the other 4 sections. And then as an individual, they uploaded their notes, and that's an individual grade that they took notes on the other sections that they learned from their small group. So it's a really great way to split up really long pieces of writing into sections as long as they can kind of stand alone. So this report itself, most of my students wouldn't read through all of it in the time that I needed them to. So by chunking it up like that, they could go through a really thick report fairly quick. You can also do, and I've done this before, we have multiple articles on the same topic. And so in this case, I talked about vocabulary, teaching vocabulary, and they each had a different article that gave a different view of how to teach a vocabulary. So one of them was in the content area, and one is how do you explicitly teach it, and how do you do it through read alouds. And so they all read the same, or read on the same topic, vocabulary, but when they came together, they got a much fuller picture. You can also do this with author studies or research studies. So everybody reads the same author, but then they come together to do some comparisons among them. Again, you can do same media. So they're all watching on the same topic or listening to a podcast, and they teach whatever they did and they bring it together. And it's a great way to have synthesis without having everybody read or consume the same content. Case studies are great to do this, where each of them bring their case study and facilitate a discussion based on their case study. Different modules, if you have it in Canvas, different data sets, but are related, or they do different experiments and then talk about them. Jigsaws are absolutely amazing. I've used them from first grade all the way up to graduate students. And like I said, it's a great way to get through a lot of content in not a lot of time and not overwhelm students with how much they have to consume for the content before they can do something with it. So here are a couple of resources on this one too. Again, there's a site there. If you don't know about it, I would encourage you to explore the Cult of Pedagogy. That site has a lot of great techniques that can be used at the higher ed level with great examples. And I've used them in a couple of these because their examples are so good. This one particularly, it's been around since the 70s. So if you do an article search, you will see how it's been applied in many different disciplines and content areas. There were some really fascinating ones about using jigsaw techniques for physics, chemistry, and biology, which I didn't understand a lot of the content, but it was really fascinating to see how it was used in different disciplines. So,
Suzanne, before you kind of conclude, I did have a question about Jigsaw, and Jigsaw is something that's, it's social psych loves it. Elliot Aronson done it as a prejudice reduction technique and building community among students and things. But a question I've always had is, how do you kind of control for differences in motivation and abilities of the students who then teach the other students? Because if you have kind of a student who's maybe not taking it as seriously, maybe not as invested, that potentially impacts that whole group's learning. So I'm kind of wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
So two things. The presentation is designed together, which makes a huge difference, because when you have expert groups and they're each doing something differently, then you have that huge variety of some great presentations and not so good. So I have them do one presentation, they all collaborate on it. And then when they move into their jigsaw groups, if that one person is not great in presenting, because they posted it to the discussion board, all the other students have access to that original presentation that should have a lot of the content in it. And as my students were taking notes this morning, they basically split screen. So they had the template for their notes, and then they would pull up the group's presentation so they could listen to the presentation, they could view it on their screen, and then they could take notes right away. The other thing, if I do know that I might have a student who may be absent and they might not be able to present, and I know about it ahead of time, or sometimes I have to double people up, I might partner or have more in an expert group so I know that they're going to be partnered up when they do the presentation.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Other questions about Jigsaw? I generally don't grade the presentations because they know others are viewing it and they have to learn from it. I have not found that it has been a problem. And like I said, what I grade is their note taking. So they know that they've got accountability. They actually have to listen and pay attention to the others who are teaching.
I think you probably also have the advantage of many cases teaching people who want to teach, which probably is a sample that is readily able to assimilate this technique.
And that is something that's really important, that if you want them to do it, like, yes, I can say, use what you want, Canva, Prezi, because I know they have that background. And if you are not sure about that, you might want to say, I want you to use this one tool and show them an example of what you expect. Absolutely. At this point, though, a lot of my students are using Canva for almost everything. Which became problematic in the presentations, because unless you use Canva that has like a PowerPoint thing, if you do like the infographic, it's really hard to see. Other thoughts or questions? Okay, so
there's one more in the chat. I'm sorry.
Oh, is there? Oh, great question, Leslie. How do I make sure? Well, first of all, when they're in their expert groups, I'm constantly going around and I'm listening in and I'm looking at it because they're posting it at the discussion board. I also have access to it. And if there's an issue, I will talk to them. So they were in their expert groups. In my case, what is today? Today is Wednesday. They were in the expert groups on Monday. And then today I gave them time to reform with their expert groups, go through their presentation, talk through it. And any issues that I saw in it, I was able to go to the group and say, ooh, this wasn't quite right, or you forgot this really important part. Why don't you put that in? So I gave them a little bit of time to regroup before they went into their Jigsaw groups. So, as I mentioned, these are just 4 tools. And again, in most cases, this is probably a reminder for many of you. You've seen or used these at some point. They can all be used in different ways. So what I'd like to do for the last couple of moments, and we've started doing this a lot in the chat, how might you use these tools or change them? Like I said, one pagers is one thing, but it's very similar to gallery walks and it's very similar to graffiti walls. So what are some ways you have either used these tools or are thinking about using these tools? And I would love just to have a conversation with you all.
I've used Flipgrid in a little different way, where I don't organize the things on Flipgrid, but I just make it available for the students to make a little Flipgrid recording, embed it, and post it into Canvas discussions. Because they're pretty familiar with Canvas discussions, but they might want to add a little something to their video. And so Flipgrid's really easy way to do that.
And every video you can grab a link just to that one video.
Exactly.
Or you can have the QR code.
Yeah.
And so as teachers for the QR code, we quite often will put the QR code, say it's a book review, we'll put a QR code on the outside of the book. And so if somebody's interested in looking at the book, they can scan the QR code. So when you think of it that way, how else could you use it?
I know that several of my colleagues used Flipgrid for parent-teacher conferences in the elementaries. I know I'm in elementary ed over here. But they had the students create a Flipgrid, and there were some specific prompts that they were to talk about for their classes, things about that. And the parents could go along and they could scan those QR codes and they could learn more about the students or what they were doing in class and some things like that. So I know that's one way that they have been used outside of like higher ed, but I mean, we could take the same type of thing and do it, like if we wanted to have our students at the end of a class semester share thoughts about the class to the incoming students, you could easily do that and have them do something. I don't know, off the top of my head.
What tips do you have, and then provide that for the incoming one?
Yeah.
I also know some instructors, especially at the higher ed, that they'll have like an office or open office one where students can post questions and the instructor will answer it. Just like in Canvas, I have a water cooler one where students can just talk about whatever if they have a question about an assignment, and I go in and answer it for the good of the whole group. You can do that through Flipgrid, so they're not typing it. How else has any of you used some of these tools?
I use Jigsaws. I don't always have them go back from their expert groups into a home group. I've also had them do where that expert group becomes the presentation in class. So everybody gets to that group presents, and they all have to have a part of the presentation from their piece. And then everybody hears the presentation one time. So I've used it in that way too.
I'll add too, like I'm inspired by the user interface of Flipgrid. Seems really applicable for online course design. And I have a course right now that I'm, slowly massaging to both create an alternate textbook for, but also to create a really engaging, online interface. And I'm just like salivating here, thinking about how can I, really fold in the Flipgrid with the alt textbook that I'm doing in Pressbooks and just have it be like this, super package. So thank you, Suzanne.
So one of the neat things about Flipgrid, and sometimes I choose to record my instructions in Flipgrid because of all those extra features that you can put in the filter, you can put text up, you can embed images. So, I mean, Zoom is pretty basic. There's not a whole lot you can play around and edit it. Where Flipgrid, you can start recording something, pause it, you can, throw up a picture or give an example or something like that, and then start recording again. And so you can come back to it a couple of times, and then your end one is really smooth. It also works a little bit like Apple Clips, where you preview your video and you can pick up, like if you've recorded and paused and recorded and paused, you can pick chunks up and move them. So you can do it in little bits rather than like Zoom really requires you do it almost all at once, which is really handy.
I'm going to flip it around and say, I could see this being used now that I have these grants that require me to be in contact with people around the country. For instance, with the NEH, my advisory team is all over the place. And I could see using this in our core meetings with our advisory team to begin to ideate their ideas about how we produce our product, but also how my tech team would work with historians to begin to put that whole platform together that we're going to use online for an interface. So this has really got me thinking about how I use it with my grants.
And that's a really great thing to think about. I was involved in a 7-person research project where we had never known each other until we came together for this. And so we did a Flipgrid just to get to know each other, to be warm and fuzzy, because like nobody wants to sit on Zoom going, hey, I'm from, Kansas, yada, yada. So we did introductory videos, but then we did another topic about what would you like to see come out of this? And so we could just kind of spout out things, and we weren't taking up valuable synchronous Zoom time, which was wonderful. I've also been involved in professional book studies where rather than having a Zoom meeting because everybody's busy, we did it asynchronously. And so we read chapter 1 and we had a topic for chapter 1 and we talked about chapter 1 in that one topic. And then chapter 2 was another one. So we could go in and respond to each other. And again, this was, voluntary, but it was a great way to do it when we don't all have 30 to 60 minutes to sit down for a professional book study that you're not getting paid for. So it was really handy to do it that way. It also means that you can provide it to a much wider audience because it doesn't have to be connected to Canvas. So it is very public. The other thing is you can keep all of the things private. So it just comes to you who set it up. So if you want to do asynchronous conferences with students, they can record a video that only you as the instructor see, and you can give them a reply that only they will see. But you got to play around with the settings to make sure that you have the private setting and other students can't see it.
Yeah, we did, I put it in the chat, but we used it for our pop culture final projects because it was difficult. Before they were in teams, but because there were so many of them, we gave them the option to do a PowerPoint and to animate it on video and then embedded all of that in and post it on Canvas. And that's pretty much the way they did it. So yeah, that seemed to work. We got more individuals who wanted to do, instead of team projects, almost everybody wanted to do an individual one, and that we didn't expect. And I think that's why.
Well, and if you think about it, we've got coming up this spring, the 3-minute thesis competition that's here on campus. You could take that same idea about anything that students are doing and say, you've got 3 minutes to summarize, present, whatever. The 3-minute thesis, basically you get to have one slide and you have to really talk about it like the elevator speech. You could do that really easy in Flipgrid.
So Dr. Porath, we are about out of time. You have a closing thought on all the wonderful tools that you've shared with us today?
Use them.
I like that. Clear, complete, concise, compelling. That's how I teach my students to write. That's fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Porath, for that wonderfully practically oriented talk. I think some of the times we have talks that really kind of inspire some, heavy thought. This was a talk where we really get some really awesome tools that we can go and use in our classes very, very soon, and I appreciate that. So please join me in thanking Dr. Porath for the wonderful presentation today. I'll remind you to meet every noon on Wednesdays over Zoom. You found us the first time, you can find us again. We'll let you know what's coming up next week when we have that confirmed. I would also like to remind everybody, if you're interested, that the Arts and Sciences 8th Annual Civil Rights Teach-In is this afternoon from 2:30 to 5 over Zoom. The information available for that was in K-State Today this morning, so I highly recommend you check that out if you're interested. As always, if you have questions or comments, let me know, but thank you for your time today. Have a great rest of your afternoon.